Lately, Christopher Nolan seems pretty focused on war movies. Two of his last three films have been set around major World War II events. First, he tackled Dunkirk, about the famous British evacuation from France, and then Oppenheimer, a massive 3-hour epic about the guy who built the atomic bomb. And of course, Nolan did a ton of prep for those movies, even showing certain films to his cast and crew for inspiration. These are some of the war movies Nolan himself calls masterpieces and a massive influence on his own films. Let's start with The Hill, probably one of the most overlooked war films Sean Connery ever did. Nolan called this one an extraordinary piece of work. It takes place in a British military prison camp in North Africa during World War II. Connery plays Joe Roberts, a soldier who's been court-martialed for punching a superior officer. He's thrown into a brutal detention facility where the guards don't care why you're there. They just want to break you. The centerpiece of the camp is this massive man-made hill that prisoners are forced to climb over and over as punishment. Not for anything specific, just because they're there. The sergeant running the place, played by Harry Andrews, is basically running a psychological torture program disguised as military order. Nolan said he was blown away by the film. During early prep for Oppenheimer, he screened a 35mm print of the hill with his cinematographer to study the camera work, especially how Oswald Morris handled black and white and captured intense performances inside confined spaces. Nolan said it helped them tame the camera into intimacy, especially during scenes with large crowds or high-pressure dialogue. Next up is The Battle of Algiers, one of the most intense political films ever made, and one that had a huge influence on Nolan when he was working on Dunkirk. The movie covers the Algerian War for Independence, showing how the Algerian resistance fought back against French colonial rule in the 1950s. It's shot like a documentary. Handheld cameras, no-name actors, real locations, and that style makes everything feel uncomfortably real. You're not watching big speeches or heroic moments. You're watching bombings, interrogations, and crowds being tear-gassed. It's a pressure cooker, and it doesn't take sides in any easy way. Both the French military and the Algerian rebels are shown doing things that are hard to justify, which is exactly why governments hated it. France, for example, banned it for years. Nolan said it was a major inspiration for Dunkirk, especially when it came to building tension without needing traditional plot beats. He called it a timeless and affecting narrative and said what makes it work is that you feel the character's reality. You don't need backstory or big emotional setups. You just get pulled in. This is one of Hitchcock's lesser-known wartime thrillers, but one that Nolan's a huge fan of. The story follows an American crime reporter who gets sent to Europe just before World War II kicks off. He stumbles onto a political assassination, uncovers a conspiracy, and ends up right in the middle of an international spy game. There's romance, suspense, and a lot of classic Hitchcock tension, including a full-blown plane crash over the ocean that's still impressive to watch. The film kind of got lost in Hitchcock's long list of classics, but Nolan's been vocal about how much it influenced him. During the Dunkirk press tour, he pointed out that Foreign Correspondent was a key reference for how to build suspense through practical effects, not CGI, just clever in-camera work. That plane crash scene, according to Nolan, directly inspired some of the aerial work in Dunkirk. He was especially into how Hitchcock used rear projection and trick photography to sell big action moments with almost no budget. If you're watching Oppenheimer and wondering where some of that political paranoia came from, this is the movie to check out. It's set just after the Korean War. An American soldier gets captured, brainwashed by communists, and then sent back home as a national hero. But he's actually been programmed to help rig the next American election. The guy who starts to figure it out is his former commanding officer, played by Frank Sinatra. This one had a direct connection to Oppenheimer, at least thematically. Nolan pointed to it when talking about the Lewis Strauss storyline, that whole wave of anti-communist hysteria that pushed Oppenheimer out of the national security world. The fear, the backroom politics, the paranoia, It's all over the Manchurian Candidate too. Terrence Malick's take on World War II, and one of Nolan's favorite war films of all time. This one covers the Battle of Guadalcanal in the Pacific, but it's not a traditional war movie. It's reflective, almost meditative. You spend more time inside the soldiers' heads than watching bullets fly. What makes it stand out is how it handles memory and time. Malick constantly cuts between past and present, flashbacks, voiceovers, internal thoughts. But there's no slow fade or visual cue to tell you it's happening. It just shifts. Nolan said that had a huge influence on how he structured Memento, especially the scenes where Guy Pearce's character remembers his wife. He said those emotional flashbacks came straight from what Malick was doing here. When Nolan was doing press for Oppenheimer, he talked about this film as a major touchstone for how you deal with big-scale violence while still focusing on internal experience. He called it an extraordinary poetic vision of war, and even said it taught him how to cut to memory without over-explaining it. David Lean's Lawrence of Arabia is one of those movies that just looms over everything. It basically defined how we think of epic war cinema. It follows T.E. Lawrence, a British officer, diplomat, and archaeologist during World War I, as he navigates the complicated politics of the war in Arabia. Nolan said watching Lawrence of Arabia when he was younger completely shaped him as a filmmaker. It's one reason why he's so stubborn about only shooting on real celluloid film. And when he made Oppenheimer, Nolan openly admitted he borrowed heavily from Lean's approach of showing a complicated hero who struggles with his own beliefs and conflicting loyalties. At over 3.5 hours, it's easily the longest movie on Nolan's favorites list. But he said multiple times it never drags. He still watches it every few years and never gets bored. It's massive in scale, but still manages to feel personal and human. Like Nolan himself said, it's the kind of war movie you can even watch as a family film at Christmas. Nolan might be the closest thing we've got today to another Steven Spielberg, a director whose name alone guarantees a huge audience. Nolan openly admits Spielberg was a direct inspiration when he decided to move away from blockbusters and dive into serious historical filmmaking with Dunkirk. And specifically, Nolan used Saving Private Ryan as a key reference. He actually called up Spielberg directly to get some advice before shooting Dunkirk. Nolan said he was still blown away by how terrifying Spielberg's famous D-Day sequence is, calling it truly horrific and admitting it still unsettles him every time he watches it. He said clearly, "We didn't want to compete with that. It's such an achievement." Nolan realized pretty quickly he had to find a different kind of tension for Dunkirk. Kubrick's Dr. Strangelove is basically the perfect movie to watch after Oppenheimer. Nolan himself has said as much. It's a pitch-black comedy about the Cold War arms race, with a crazy general accidentally setting off a nuclear attack on Russia. So you've got politicians and generals scrambling to stop it before total Armageddon. Even though Nolan loves this movie, he actually stopped watching it for a few years while developing Oppenheimer because he was afraid of making any comparisons to Kubrick's classic satire. Nolan admitted that during filming, it was impossible not to think about the iconic war room scenes from Dr. Strangelove, where politicians and generals debate the fate of the world. They're totally different kinds of movies, obviously, but Nolan's 3-hour epic still shares that sense of intense behind-the-scenes tension. Forget that recent Netflix remake. Christopher Nolan's talking about the original 1930 film, a groundbreaking World War I movie that really didn't hold back. Adapted from Remarque's famous novel, it puts us right into the trenches alongside a naive young German soldier. The whole romantic idea of war gets shredded pretty fast. When Nolan made Dunkirk, he specifically referenced this film, calling it a key touchstone. Nolan called it the original and definitive statement on how war dehumanizes people. Revisiting that masterpiece, it is hard to disagree that the intensity and horror have never been bettered. For me, the film demonstrates the power of resisting the convention of finding meaning and logic in individual fate. In Oppenheimer, everyone's praising Cillian Murphy's performance, obviously. But Tom Conti is also getting singled out for his brief but unforgettable turn as Albert Einstein. Nolan worked with Conti before, back in The Dark Knight Rises, but he actually considers Conti's best performance to be in this underrated 1983 war film by Nagisa Oshima. Conti plays Lieutenant Colonel John Lawrence, a British officer stuck in a Japanese camp during World War II, trying to navigate cultural clashes and language barriers between prisoners and captors. Nolan has publicly called this film one of his top Criterion releases, praising Conti specifically for being such a sympathetic audience guide through a complex, emotional story. He even cast David Bowie, who starred alongside Conti here, in The Prestige specifically because of how much he loved Bowie's acting here.